Hi guys, welcome to our Facebook Live where we're going to be discussing GDPR again with Jamie Lieberman of #Legal. Jamie, you want to go say hi?
Hi, everyone.
Maybe introduce us quickly for what GDPR is for the publishers that may not remember from our last Facebook Live or were not able to watch it.
Sure. So I'm going to give a little bit of information, and I can definitely answer more if people have other questions. But GDPR is the new European Union privacy law. It means the General Data Protection Regulation, and it takes effect May 25th, which is why of this year, which is why everyone is talking about it. Essentially, what it does is it just gives greater protection to an individual's personal information. Now, a lot of people are probably asking, why on earth do we care about a European Union law when most of us, many of us are US based. And as everybody may or may not know, I'll say I am an attorney that is licensed in the US. And so I am talking about this law strictly from a US company perspective. Anybody in the US who is, or anywhere in the world, frankly, who is either monitoring or targeting any European Union residents, doesn't have to be citizens, and there doesn't have to be a commercial transaction. Just anytime you were to take information from an EU resident, needs to comply with their new data regulations as of May 25th, sorry. And so what does that mean? There's a lot. This is a 225-page law. So I just want everybody to know that there hasn't been, because it's not in effect yet, there's just a lot that isn't known. And so we're trying to gather all this information and make it as accessible as possible. There's going to be changes along the way, I'm sure, as more and more, as courts weigh in about what certain things mean. But these are interpretations that are sort of widely known as how people are approaching it coming up on May 25th. So if you do monitor, like if you have a website, you're a publisher who does have European Union residents, you now have to make sure that you get consent, which is active consent from any EU resident for you to collect their data. And data collection doesn't just mean name, email address. It also means IP addresses, if you're utilizing cookies, tracking pixels, things like that. So you just need to let your visitors know from the EU what data you're collecting, who you're collecting it for, who your third-party providers are, like Mediavine, as an example, and ask the resident, the EU resident, for specific permission or consent to capture that data for that particular purpose. And so I think that's why we're here today, is to talk about that.
Yeah, and the other thing we're hoping to do today is to present the Mediavine official solution for our ads. Unfortunately, our other broadcast software we're attempting to use did not connect properly with Facebook, and we were hoping to show you guys some screenshots of it. But we'll have some in the Facebook group after this. But the idea being we are following the IAB Europe, International Advertising Bureau in Europe, their consent framework. And what that means is it will be collecting all known vendors that register. We'll be collecting permission on their behalf to be able to personalize and measure ads. And before we show any ads, we will be obtaining explicit consent on your behalf from your users. And that will be free for all Mediavine publishers, and it will be launched directly through the same technology that loads your ads on your site. So there's nothing new for you to install. It's just simply something you'll be able to log into your dashboard, enable after agreeing to the terms of using the consent management platform, and then you'll even be able to add your own consents for any data you're collecting about your users outside of advertisements. So a single pop-up, they'll be able to obtain consent on advertisements. So when the third party is collecting information, as well as any information your site will be collecting. And so normally we have our very charming host, Jenny, on the line to bring in reader questions. Do we have any questions from the group about GDPR when it comes to advertisements, or anything you have now that you have Jamie and me on the line? Oh, screenshots are coming into the comments. All right, first question is, what type of ads will serve if we're unable to obtain consent. So if a user chooses not to allow us to personalize their ads for them, which would mean basically they do not consent into the tracking or the data that's required in order to serve personalized ads, we're going to serve what's considered contextual ads. So those are ads that are attempting to match your page rather than matching the user, so that the user's privacy is protected. So we will know nothing about the user, and then ads that we'll serve will be, again, based upon keywords you may have mentioned in the post, or whatever the advertiser can target, that, again, is anonymous to the user, but they're best able to try to match their audience as an advertiser. So typically, you're going to see lower performance as a result of those ads. Programmatic, they say a majority of the value comes from the user and not from the page itself. So the ads will definitely perform worse, but we definitely think that's better than the alternative, which would be not monetizing those users. So that's really the position that kind of everyone in the advertising world has taken. Let's try to obtain consent. If we can't, let's show them non-personalized ads. We got another question. How can you protect RPMs? Well, as I just mentioned, so CPMs are going to be lower if we're not able to obtain consent. So what we would definitely recommend is, if you have, typically you're going to have a better relationship with your user than we at Mediavine would have with your end user. So if you really want to do your best to protect your RPM, it's going to be about educating your consumers or the readers of your site about why they should be consenting to allow us to serve personalized ads. Again, it's a lot of this is about user privacy, which we absolutely respect and love here at Mediavine. But there seems to be generally some confusion about what's being, I think, sometimes tracked about users. And that's really what GDPR is about. And if you can explain to users in plain English that we're not actually targeting them as based on, we're not targeting Jamie Lieberman over here. We're just targeting a user that may have visited the site and what we're able to collect anonymously around them. I think people would be a little less frightened. And if you can convince users it's not as bad as the media is making it out to be, by consenting, you're going to allow me to make a living. I think that's the best way you're going to protect your RPMs, working on that messaging and establishing that relationship with your readers so they know consenting is not a bad thing. All right, question. Do we have to use Mediavine's pop-up to remain a Mediavine publisher? So no, we're not going to require the use of our pop-up to remain a Mediavine publisher. If you wish to obtain consent on your own and are using your own IAB framework or IAB consent framework compatible thing, or whatever other option you wish to do, if you want to take on that liability yourself, or we shouldn't say the word liability, got a lawyer here. If you want to take that on yourself, you're definitely going to be able to. What's the word?
Responsibility.
Responsibility, yep. If you want to take on that responsibility yourself, you're going to be able to. That's going to be an option you'll be able to choose from your dashboard. There might be an extra little agreement you'll need to make with Mediavine, but that's going to be something you'll have to do on your behalf if you wish to obtain it. And then you will not have to use the Mediavine pop-up. All right, Jamie, can you tell us a little bit about how publishers are expected to handle cookies being collected on their site?
Well, you have to get consent for cookies as well. I can't really talk about the tech side of things because I'm not a tech person, but I do believe there are some plugins that can assist with cookies. I've actually seen some that have come to sites that I've visited at the bottom, and you basically need to tell your user that you are using cookies, what you're using them for, and what data is being collected. So that's, as long as you have that information and the user consents, then you can go ahead and use them. But it's the exact same framework for every type of data collection.
And we have a question of, will users have to consent every time they visit a site? Good question. So the way we have it right now is if a user agrees, and this is per the framework standards, they agree, we're going to hold on to that consent for up to 13 months. However, if the vendor list, which is a list of third parties that your users are authorizing to do things such as measure or personalizing ads, if that changes, we'll need to obtain consent for new vendors that have been added. So that we're actually going to be controlling that a little more than just the IAB standards, because otherwise you might see people popping in every day, and therefore it would be a new consent every time they visit. So we're going to kind of fork that. in the computer speak. And we're going to make sure that it doesn't change more than, I don't know, once a month at most. So your users won't really see this more than once a month. So after they consent, they'll be good to go and just continue to use your site. And especially on a second page view or third page view, they will not have to keep reconsenting. Christine asked, will we be able to personalize the wording of the pop-up? We will have some flexibility, I think, over time. We'll have to work with Jamie just to make sure, because I think there has to be some legal requirements about what phrasing we're having when we ask them for consent. So there'll be some levels of customization, but not at launch. Well, that's something we'll have to figure out. Okay, I guess a lot of people are just asking if this is only going to target EU users or EU residents. So right now, the way it is designed is we're going to use the IP address of the user to figure out if they are an EU resident or not. So if they're in the EU at the time. And if they are, they will be served this pop-up. If they are not at an EU-based IP address, they will not be served the pop-up. So if someone is in the United States, in Canada, Australia, wherever we're left that's not under the control of the EU, they will not get that pop-up. And just the same question I think we got before is, how is income going to be impacted? And that's going to be tough to say. One of the things we're doing this week is we're going to be testing early on our own site to kind of measure percentage of users that we're seeing consent or opt in. I think that's going to help us know really the impact on revenue. It's very tough to be able to say without running some of these real world tests. And I think everyone right now is just guessing. We've heard very scary numbers that I don't want to repeat here because I think we can do better. I'm not as worried as the world is making this out to be. I think if we do obtain consent from our users, we're going to have the most valuable users, because at the end of the day, advertisers still need to advertise and reach their audience. And if Mediavine publishers are first and foremost obtaining consent, and we're the only ones that are, our users are going to be more valuable. So I'm hoping this won't lead to a drastic CPM drop because we're addressing this head on and not just ignoring this. Stephanie, does all that information need to be in the pop-up? Can we just say we're collecting cookies and then have a link to read our full privacy policy? This one definitely seems like a Jamie question, so I'm going to direct this one at her. Do we need all that language?
You need to tell them all of the information in the most succinct way that you can, so that they know why you're collecting them, who you're collecting it for, and what you're going to do with it. That's part of the consent, and it can't be in legalese. It has to be in plain language, which I think is better, because like Eric said, I think people will then be able to make an informed decision. And if you do it in a way that is convincing why it's worthwhile, I think people will be more inclined to click it. But yes, you need to provide all that information. You can no longer just link to a privacy policy. There has to be actual consent with that knowledge.
Okay, and someone is asking if we're going to be able to tie the cookie consent into our pop-up. And again, you're able to bring your own consents in to our framework. So you'll be able to add in the language of additional things you're trying to obtain consent for. And for the programmers out there will be a JavaScript kind of library for you to use, or callback system, so that you know when they gave you consent or did not give you consent, and you can act accordingly. So we're going to have documentation, all that. Again, it's using the IAB standard, so it is a standard callback across all sites that are using the standard, if I can say the word standard any more times. So yes, you will be able to add that kind of consent.
And I think it's worthwhile that if you do have questions, that you just talk to an attorney and ask them straight out if your language works, because it's very specific. There can't be a catch-all, because everybody's website is different and everybody's collecting data in different ways. And I know people want this like one-stop shop, and you just sort of have to look at how you're collecting data, do an audit of your site, make your list, and then if you have questions, it can't hurt to just talk to an attorney to ask and make sure you're covered.
And then we have another question: if the pop-up's only going to happen in the EU, how will you be able to test it on if you are not in the EU? So you can move. You can use what I do, which is a proxy server, which is the best way to test these things. Or we're actually going to give you a way to easily test it from your site, because we're not jerks. But yeah. You're going to be able to add a query string parameter or something to your URL that will make that consent pop up, just so you can see what it looks like. It's not going to be the real experience, because it's just going to be forced upon you every time you put that in. And again, a user will not have that pop up on every single page. but that's just a way for you to see what it looks like. So you don't have to travel and you don't have to use a proxy. All right, Beatrice. Will the Mediavine pop-up cover all of our bases? Well, we need this pop-up plus other ones for the other data. Again, similar to what we've been saying, is you will be able to add into this one. If you would like to adopt this one, there will be some work on your behalf. Not only will you have to put in the language of what you're obtaining consent for, but then you'll have to honor that consent to make sure you're only collecting that data if the user gave you that consent. So it absolutely can be your catch-all if you're able to do that.
There's also a lot of the other third-party providers have their own versions for their specific services, like mailing lists. You know, you're not going to want to capture consent for your mailing list upon entering into the site. You'll want to do that when a person goes to subscribe to your mailing list. And those look completely different because if you're thinking about lead magnets, that's different. You need a specific consent for every reason you're going to be using someone's email address. So if you do have a lead magnet that you use to get people to sign up for your mailing list, you're going to need 2 consents for EU residents. 1, so that you can use it to give them the lead magnet, and 2, so that you can use it to add them to your mailing list. And so you may need to look at your other providers as well to see what they're doing. I also know WordPress is going to have some changes as well. So if you're on WordPress sites, that will help too. So I think it's going to be a combination of a number of different things, although Mediavine has opened it up in a way that will definitely help you have less pop-ups.
Right. No, I think as Jamie said, it was best. Like obtaining consent at the time is the best way to do this. And with comments and with mailing lists and all these other things you're using to collect data, sometimes just literally just putting an extra checkbox there. So work with those vendors that are providing these for you, and they should be able to help you offer that solution. All right. Good question. When will this be ready? When can people start testing this? So again, Mediavine is going to be testing this on our own sites this week. And which obviously the deadline's coming up. I just had to go look at the calendar in 10 days. So we're hoping we will have this in your hands at least a few days earlier than the 25th, which sadly is faster than most people are getting this stuff in our hands. So we're going to make sure that you have this to be able to test ahead of time. You can check out demos of it again now in the comments below to check out the screenshots. Will the pop-up have any effect on SEO? Great question. That obviously everyone remembers when Google announced the ranking signal that you had to remove all interstitials from your site. However, in that announcement, this was a couple of years back, Google actually did put an exemption for that ranking signal. And you can read on the official blog post on their site where they said if you need to do it to obtain permission for legal reasons such as cookie consent. So it is worth knowing the GDPR is not brand new, nor any of these privacy laws. This stuff has been around for years now, and I think GDPR itself is what, 2 years old? Yeah. Okay, getting a nod, so I said that correctly. So this stuff isn't necessarily new. So Google knew this was coming, and knew Google is going to allow that without an SEO penalty, or at least they should, because they are one of the ones requiring us to do this. So I can't imagine you'll be getting a penalty on that. All right. Great question from our own Jenny. What the heck is a cookie? That is a good thing we should probably explain to people. You are correct. This is why you should be here as that third face. We don't have technology issues here. So a cookie is just a way of storing data locally about a user. So cookies are stored within your own browser. They're not stored at the third party. So things that cookies are used for are sometimes the most harmless of tasks. That is to remember, when you click remember my username, what that's actually doing is that's creating a cookie in their web browser. So the next time they visit your site, that web page can look into the cookie jar, look at their cookie and say, hey, this was your username. I'm going to fill that in for you. So cookies are really just a way of storing local information on your browser. That's not actually how third parties store things. So a cookie is actually just for your eyes only and the person that basically helped you store that cookie. So the only person that gets access to that cookie is the website that stored it. So a cookie is just a name for basically a local file on your computer that stores some information. You're actually able to go look into the cookies in your browser right now for any site you visit and see what they're storing about you. So they're not as terrible as they sound. And one thing we should mention is we have an amazing couple blog posts already about GDPR, including one by Jamie that includes a checklist of what you should do to help you become GDPR compliant. So please check that out.
There is some sample language in there for consents too. I think I saw a couple questions about that. So that should help with those questions.
All right. Can we talk about third-party data collection such as Google Analytics and how that will be impacted? Jamie, I know you touched on this one a bit during your talk. Do you want to talk a little bit about Google Analytics?
Sure. So there's a way that you can anonymize your data collection through Google Analytics. I cannot tell you how that is because I am a lawyer, but I do know you can do it, and I know lots of people who have. And essentially what it does is it anonymizes the last, I think, 3 digits of the IP address. So you can still tell where someone's from, but not their exact IP address, which has taken it out of personal information. So they'd know, I think you were from the area in New Jersey I'm from, they would know that, but they wouldn't know exactly my computer, my IP address. And that has taken away the issue with requiring and needing consent for Google Analytics if you just anonymize the data.
Yeah, so that's definitely what, I guess we're not allowed to make recommendations, but if we had to make a recommendation, that would be the easiest path, would be to do that rather than attempting to obtain consent. Because remember, you have to obtain consent at time of data collection. So you'd actually need to obtain that consent before you fired your Google Analytics. Yeah. So if you're going to anonymize it, we actually have a blog post coming out about that to give you the step-by-step instructions. And there's plenty of other ones on the internet. If you do read sites other than Mediavine, you can check them out and they'll give you instructions on how to anonymize IP address so you're not collecting about that individual user. Okay, if the user doesn't click the pop-up and travels to another page, can you rely on implied consent? I believe the wording of the GDPR is explicit consent. So unfortunately, no. That basically the pop-up, the way we have it set right now is the user's not going to be able to do anything on your site until they either give consent or explicitly opt out. So we're going to get an explicit consent or explicit opt-out. We're not going to allow them to use the site. So if they leave, there's no implied. If they come back, they're still required to fill out that consent form. So we're not going off of implied. Dave has a question. Will the pop-up work on AMP pages? So unfortunately, AMP is a very controlled environment, controlled by basically the Google and the other creators of the open source library. So we cannot create a pop-up on AMP. However, there is a built-in framework into AMP for obtaining consent. And we're going to be working on coming up with solutions to help you use that built-in consent framework. Again, our pop-up and the IAB one cannot work because it is a controlled environment that we physically could not do that even if we wanted to. So we're going to have to play within the Google world there. So it'll be a little bit different, but we're going to help you guys navigate that for people that have a lot of AMP traffic. Stephen asks, so we need a cookie and GDPR pop-up. We're all on one. Again, so one of the problems with cookies is I am going to say even just putting up a cookie consent, and that was kind of the old privacy model, and saying we're going to be using cookies is not explicit consent, and GDPR really requires explicit consent before you start using those cookies. So those cookie consents that are out there are not actually doing what you want them to do. So I don't even know if those would be the solution. So running those in addition to our GDPR, maybe that complies with old privacy laws, but that's not going to help you comply with GDPR. And okay, lawyers being quiet, so what I'm saying is correct. So what I would recommend is with anything in the GDPR, just make sure you're obtaining explicit consent before collecting those cookies. So I'd recommend you use ours and you work with vendors to make sure they're using. Again, this is a standard framework we're using. It's the IAB consent framework. You can literally send them a link to it, and they can go ahead and register themselves as a vendor and respect the settings on the page. And there should be no work on your behalf. This should be the work of the vendors to basically abide by this framework. And again, this is the main framework being used by all the biggest names in measurement and in analytics. So I would instead put it on them rather than on you. And I would stick to the one GDPR. That would be my strategy, not my recommendation. Courtney, will this conflict with the WordPress solution? Will the world one be necessary if we use the WordPress one be necessary if we use Mediavines? So I think the WordPress solutions are not necessarily going to be a pop-up that's obtaining advertising consent. So you're definitely going to need to use the Mediavine one if you want to rely on us or to be able to accurately pass consent to the advertising partners. Until that WordPress solution is actually live, and I don't think it's technically live yet, we can't speak to it, but I know they're handling things like comments and that kind of stuff on your behalf. I think that's what WordPress is going to focus on, their data collection, as opposed to data collection they don't know about. So I would guess it's going to help you in solving this, but it's not an either or.
I agree.
But again, we will know more when it's live. If you don't do anything but ads in a newsletter sign up, and you don't have cookies stored on people's computers, where's the question? Oh, and I guess that is a question. Sorry, I'm terrible at reading. So if you're only using ads and newsletters, are there other cookies? Yes, because again, if you're more than likely using something like WordPress, you're also allowing comments. Users can log in. There are going to be other cookies on your site, and that's why we encourage everyone to have a unique privacy policy. Figure out the type of information your system is collecting, whether you designed it or not. That's not control of the user. So you want to make sure you know what, whether you're using WordPress, whatever CMS you're using, what data you're collecting. All right, Christine, if we add a cookie consent to the Mediavine pop-up and the user clicks no to the cookie consent, what happens? Again, nothing's going to happen from necessarily user perspective. So we're going to store, and I'm trying to think how to not get this too technically. Again, this is an IAB standard. So it will be basically storing a global variable. Again, that's probably not even a word that I should be using here, but a global variable in which other people on page can read. So again, we're adopting a standard, and we hope that everyone else adopts this same standard. And if so, then they could read from that global and say, okay, the user did not give consent. I should not be doing this stuff. However, if you're relying on your own consents you're adding in, that's going to be at your responsibility to make sure that you are not collecting cookies if the user did not consent to cookies. And we can provide examples in our code of how you could do those kinds of things, but it's really going to be about working with these third parties and making sure they're obtaining it. Karen, if my EU traffic is less than 5%, should I not see much change in income? Well, if it's less than 5%, then yes. I mean, by nature of it, it's going to be less than a 5% impact to your earnings. And if the rest of that 95% or a vast majority of your traffic is from the United States, then this will have pretty minimal impact to you, luckily. US tends to monetize at nearly twice the rates of other countries. So if you're majority US, EU probably doesn't even if it's 5% of your traffic, wouldn't necessarily make up 5% of your revenue because so much more of your revenue is coming from the US. So luckily, I don't think this is going to have a big impact on your revenue, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't conform to GDPR. I know we've had people that ask, can I just shut off those ads in that other country? But as Jamie said, you can't just because you don't have commercial interest there doesn't mean you can just ignore it. You have to still respect user privacy in the EU. Luckily though, it won't hurt your earnings that much if you're less than 5%. And Christine wants to know, does the Mediavine consent pop-up cover us for affiliate links too? I actually don't know the requirements for affiliate links. So Jamie?
So with affiliate links, the way that you would need to get consent is when you put an affiliate link in. So you need to let people know by clicking on this affiliate link, this is an affiliate link, and I'm going to collect this data. So you need to tell people that it's an affiliate link, and you need to tell them what data is being collected, and they can choose not to, so you don't collect that data. I can't, like I said, I can't tell you how to technically do that, but it's the same idea across the board.
So the time of clicking the link.
Time of clicking the link. So, you know, you can't get, you know, you could certainly it would be really hard to put up a blanket consent in the beginning. It's really when the person is doing the actual activity. The reason why the pop-up happens immediately for Mediavine ads is because the ads immediately run upon the person coming onto a website. And so the ads can't run until they give the consent. So it's really at the time that you'd be collecting the data is how you have to think about it. So you have to get consent before you collect that data. That's why the mailing list is a little bit different. You know, when somebody comes to put their information in, that's when you'd want to get that consent before they put it in, that they're consenting to receive your newsletter.
Got 2 questions from Michelle here. Any thoughts on plugins we use in helping verify if A, they collect data, and B, whether they're GDPR compliant or need to be? I think the best thing to do would be to go to that plugin's website or asking that person who runs the plugin what data they collect and if they're GDPR compliant. I don't think anyone's containing a master list of these things somewhere, and I think unfortunately you're just going to have to go plugin by plugin. It's good spring cleaning time as well, I should mention this week.
It's a good thing to know all the ways that we collect data. So right. It's maybe not a bad thing to audit.
Yeah, I mean, I think like one great example of this is like the sharing plugins that everybody runs. They don't realize it's just how much data that's collecting about users for no reason other than the benefit of the social sharing button and not necessarily the benefit of you as a publisher. So really, I'd love for people to use this as a chance to actually ask these questions because they are good questions. I know we all want to blame the GDPR for being some terrible regulation that we have to deal with, but there's so much good behind this. So look to the good. All right, another question from Michelle. If we go down the route Jamie described of anonymizing GA data, will that have an impact on RPM? No, definitely not. That's just going to be your analytics of your users that visit your site. It will have nothing to do with the ads that run. So I don't think there's going to be a ton of harm if you just anonymize the data. And that's honestly what we're going to do for our own sites here at Mediavine. And I would probably just recommend doing if you want the easiest solution for Google Analytics. You're not going to lose a ton of data about your users because generally when you're using Google Analytics, you're looking at the aggregate anyway. You just want to know how many people from New Jersey came to your site. You don't care if Jamie came, or maybe you do. I don't know.
You care.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole different debate, but I would say you don't have to worry that much. Just anonymize it and know that you had enough people from New Jersey coming to your site. Okay. All right. Rini asks, what kind of fines can bloggers face if we don't do it correctly? So
the GDPR has this massive 4% of annual global turnover or a 20 million euro fine. That's just what's in the GDPR. Obviously, nobody knows how it's going to be enforced or how that fine is going to work or who's going to be looked at, scrutinized first, but that's pretty much all we know is it's a pretty heavy fine. And I can't speak to whether or not bloggers will be at issue, whether it's the Facebooks of the world or whoever, but pretty much anybody it applies to, that fine could exist. And we just don't know. It's going to be a wait and see game, unfortunately.
Yeah. Non-lawyerly, I'm going to tell you, do everything you can to comply and get as close as freaking possible. And that's the best you can do. I would not assume that you're going to get a 20 million euro fine on May 25th. Right. That's probably not going to happen. So just focus on doing the best you can. Lisa wants to know, do we need a data processing agreement with Mediavine or advertisers? This is definitely a Jamie question.
So Mediavine is a data collector, not a data processor. So without getting too into the depth of it, as of right now, that is how Mediavine and the publishers, which you are an extension of which, are being characterized. So that's not an issue. But other advertisers and partners are considered the data processors. And so they are the ones who need the data processing agreements.
So short answer, no. All right. Is it, okay. Nolene wants to basically tell us it's impossible to get consent every time a user clicks a link, especially if it's just a general link to a different resource. So what do we do? Basically, I guess is the question really there.
I think the answer is ultimately going to be you're going to have to look for the the technology that's going to have to assist, looking for the plugins. I think people are going to get really creative really fast because it's a big market. And so I think you're going to start to see a lot of people coming up with some creative ways to get the consents that are needed. It's just people are sort of scrambling right now to figure it all out. But things are happening, and I think you just have to do your best to get those consents as well as you can, which I know everybody loves that lawyer answer, but that's sort of the best you can do right now. And just keep an eye on it, track it, see the sort of technological resources that are coming out. I know there's a lot of things that are popping up every single day, different plugins. You just have to sort of talk to people, see how other people are doing it, test things out. Just it's a work in progress, and I think as long as you're making best efforts, that's the best way to approach it. Just take it step by step. It's overwhelming, I understand, because it's a 225-page law. But if you really just sit down and do that audit, figure out every single way, and then approach them one by one. And Mediavine's already taken care of one, the ads, which is a big one for a lot of people. Look at your third-party providers, ask them those questions. That it should be able to just be a checklist that you check off. And talk to your affiliate managers, see how they're handling it.
Courtney has another one. I feel like this is Jamie territory. Should we hire an independent review once we get it all set up to make sure we've done it right?
That's if you want. That's a personal choice. Some people certainly will. There are tech people out there that are doing technical reviews. There are attorneys who will do those reviews. I think that's a personal choice. If you want to, by all means, if it'll give you some peace of mind and make you feel less tense, then sure, you should definitely ask. Make sure that the lawyer or the technical person knows what they're doing and has an understanding of this area, because it's, you know, always moving and always changing.
All right, another question for you, Jamie. Can you talk about the differing needs for publishers in the US versus the EU and what applies to which?
So I cannot give any advice for anyone but US-based companies. EU is there's a whole lot of other considerations that come into play. So I'd recommend talking to a local attorney in your country if you're not in the US. If you're in the US, our privacy laws are a little bit different. They're not quite GDPR standard. Everybody in the US is required to have a privacy policy. The state of California requires it. So unless you're shutting off California visitors to your website, you need to have a privacy policy, and you should have a privacy policy. And then that privacy policy should, you know, do pretty much what it is that we're talking about. There are not explicit consent requirements in the US the way that there are in the EU. But, you know, letting people know and having them opt in and consent, it makes for better data collection. It makes your lists more meaningful. I know a lot of people are very nervous about sending, you know, a consent out to their list because they're afraid people are going to drop out. But I think it just gives you a better list, because it's people who legitimately want to read what it is that you're writing and that are going to engage, and it'll bring more value. But in the US, we just need to have a privacy policy that details all the ways that you collect data and what you do with it, and ways that people can opt out. And you also have to worry about children as well. You shouldn't be collecting data or information from anyone under the age of 16, and you need to get parental permission for anyone under the age of 18.
So Christine has a question, and that is, if we provide our RSS feeds to third parties such as FeedBurner, BlogLovin, and places where people are browsing our feeds, not on our sites, do we have to worry about those when it comes to GDPR? And I actually don't know how to answer that one, so I'm going to look at you, Jamie.
I think we're going to. I think you'd have to look at what FeedBurner and those companies are doing. I haven't looked at that, to be honest, and so I can take a look at it and see if I can. I haven't had that question asked of me, but I think the best bet is to look at what they're saying, and I don't know how they collect data or what data you're actually. If you are even collecting any data from people who are visiting and looking at your RSS feed. So I would look to them and ask them.
Yeah, I think the default answer should always be ask the third party and see what they're collecting, right? Like you're just handing them the RSS feed that's ultimately going to be users visiting their site. using that RSS feed and reading the content there. So find out exactly. I would go to them. Steve wants to know, for email subscribers, do we just need consent for previous subscribers prior to May 25th, or just adding consent to the subscribe page for new subscribers? So we have to worry about the old ones, or is it just the new ones?
So this is a hot topic. The answer is, if you got explicit consent prior to May 25th from an EU resident, the explicit consent as I've described, which I know a lot of email marketers say not to ask for, or in the past did not, then no, you don't need to get it again. But if you didn't, and if you did not get that explicit consent or cannot show that you got that explicit consent, then yes, if you can segment out your email list and you know where people are come from, you should be sending out emails and getting that consent again from any EU resident. If you can't segment out your emails, then you should be sending it to everybody on your list if you did not obtain that consent. Don't throw darts at my picture, please. I'm just the messenger.
So Gloria wants to know, are you talking about every link on the site we have to get consent for, as in if we're just linking to another blogger, or is it just affiliate links that we need to obtain that consent on?
Any link that someone clicks where you collect data. So if you're not collecting any data by somebody clicking a link to another blog, then you don't need to get that consent because you're not getting anything. You really have to be focused on where you're collecting data.
Right. So it's important to know that exactly when you send someone to an affiliate, there is data collection being done on your behalf, right? Sending them to another publisher, there's not data being necessarily collected unless you have an arrangement with that publisher.
Right.
But
there are things, there are things like tracking pixels and sponsored content. So if you're working with like networks that utilize tracking pixels, those are collecting data. And so you need to know how those third parties are dealing with them. I know some networks will shut off the tracking pixel after a few months. So if you have, you know, a sponsored post from 3 years ago, odds are, and you should confirm, that tracking pixel is long gone. But just make sure, particularly for the most recent ones that you've done, if there are tracking pixels in there, you'll want to get consent before someone clicks that link. If they're using it, not all sponsored content has tracking pixels.
And Olin wants to know, how do you know the age of the person on the other side of the computer?
You ask.
It's part of the consent. All right. We still have another few minutes left here. Do we have any other questions? Don't have anything else coming in. I do want to let you know that we'll be sharing all the links from these GDPR, all these resources we've discussed in the Mediavine Facebook group. Also going to be posting this video in our YouTube channel, so please subscribe. You'll also see me there weekly. And stand by for a step-by-step guide, as I mentioned before, on how to make sure your Google Analytics are anonymizing the data so that you don't have to obtain consent again for your Google Analytics. And yeah, there's a whole lot more of these live posts coming. We're looking for topics and guests you may be interested in. So please, as always, ask in the group so we can do more of these. And hopefully not just always talk to you about GDPR, but more fun topics.
I'd like to talk about a fun topic.
Let's bring Jamie back for something not GDPR related.
Yes, I'd love that.
Oh, we got another question that came in. Marina, if email subscribers had to click a confirmation link in an email when they subscribed, was that explicit consent? So if we had an original double opt-in.
It depends on how you asked and what it said, which is my lawyer answer. It depends.
Yeah, that was coming. Anyway, good to start answering for Jamie.
Sorry. It's hard. These are very fact-specific questions, and I don't want to give bad information to someone and have someone rely on it without me knowing, because each person does something differently.
Right. Remember, you may have only obtained consent for that user joining your mailing list and not necessarily for any data that you may have also collected, I think is what Jamie's getting at there. And Eric wants to know, for affiliate links, is legitimate interest not possible legal ground? So legitimate interest, another hot topic of the GDPR.
It is. The answer is it's not clear yet who and when is going to be relying, other than there are certain very clear parties that can rely on legitimate interest. I haven't seen affiliate links as one of them. I can certainly look and see if that's changed. And if someone has a resource where it is showing that an affiliate link is a legitimate interest, then certainly I'd love to see it, and I'll look again, but I hadn't seen that.
Okay, Michelle wants to know, oh, and I should note real quick, the Mediavine solution is not a plugin. It is not a WordPress plugin. This will work across all platforms, not just WordPress sites. But Michelle wants to know if that Mediavine pop-up or the consent framework is going to ask for age. At this time, it does not ask for age. That is not part of the IAB consent framework spec. But that is something we will take into account and we'll discuss. Steve, is it required to announce when you change your privacy policy? And if so, is there a timeline of how much in advance that you need to announce the change? Also, does the announcement need to be made on both the website and the email subscribers? Jamie, that is all you.
I mean, the more you can tell people, the better. I would always recommend letting people know when the terms and conditions of your website have changed. A lot of people in their privacy policy will have, last update and a date. But, the implied consent that used to be relied upon for the EU doesn't exist anymore. So just saying, by being on my website, you agree to my terms and conditions and my privacy policy, that just doesn't fly for the EU anymore. So anytime you have a change, it can't hurt to let people know in some way. That's why you're getting so many emails from so many of your providers saying, we've updated our privacy policy.
All right. So I think we're finishing up here, unless we have any other questions. Oh, you got one more. Someone had to sneak it in before that minute. Let's do it, Beatrice. All right, so if I got this right, when someone visits my website, I need to have a pop-up that asks for the user's age. Then if they're in the EU, they will get served a Mediavine pop-up so I can show them ads. Then if they want to subscribe to my email list, clicking I want to subscribe is not enough. They have to click a box that says, yes, I want to subscribe. Click the button that says subscribe. Then next to every affiliate link, I need to have a line that says, if you do not want to click the affiliate link, here's a regular link. I'm reading this sarcastically enough, I feel like. Because there's the other way around, there's no other way around. I get the idea behind this law, I really do, but this makes no sense and will make the internet unbearable. All right, did I read that in ranty enough tone for you? I don't know.
Hey, sorry.
I think some of this is, again, if you very literally, yes. I mean, there are some things that will make the internet worse as a result of this. But again, I think this is it's such a good natured law in terms of like just learning what data we're collecting and allowing people to opt out easily instead of buried behind privacy policies that nobody knew how to actually opt out before.
Or read.
And
I think there really will be some really good solutions that come up that will not be as cumbersome as what Beatrice is describing. I have confidence that will happen.
I think once you see the Mediavine consent in action, no one's going to hate it. It's not going to ruin user experience. And I think it's just going to be part of browsing the internet. Now, when you first visit a site, you have your rights to opt out. Like that's just going to be how it is for EU users. And I don't think they're going to be like, oh man, another consent. I mean, that's just the internet for them. And they'll probably be very happy. The ones that want to consent will, and then want to opt out, they're going to know exactly how they opt out. And it'll be pretty easy. And I'm sure we'll see better solutions coming than even this consent framework. Again, this is something the industry really only started addressing. Maybe I think this exact IAB framework came out at the end of April. So we really don't know what's coming. Maybe this will be built into browsers. Who the heck knows what the future holds? And this might be a lot better than we think going forward. Remember, we haven't even hit May 25th yet.
Yeah. And the US may catch up. So by doing this all now, it puts us in a position that when the US does decide to start passing privacy laws, we'll be ready.
Fun fact, I did not know until Jamie's last Facebook Live that the reason we even have privacy policies here, mostly in the US, is because of a California law. Yep. So you don't know what's coming to the US as well. So I'm learning these things now. It's not a bad thing in solving for these things. Again, just look at this as a chance to do a spring cleaning of your plugins, spring cleaning of all the third-party scripts that are running on your site collecting data. I know we've actually done that internally at Mediavine. I think it's been a great thing. So I don't see this, again, I'll keep looking for the silver lining in this. I don't see this as a negative for Mediavine publishers or for Mediavine. So I think we got everyone. So thank you guys all for listening. This was awesome. Got 84 of you right now, so that's pretty impressive. You made it all the way through this. So thank you guys. We promise more fun Facebook Lives are coming, but thank you, Jamie, again for making law as much fun as you can.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you guys all for the great questions, and I'll see you guys at the next Facebook Live.